Hey, it's Jeff Zito, and thanks for checking out another episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast, streaming on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe. Would love a 5-star rating, and please leave a review. You can check out past guests on celebrityjobber.com, and check out our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. What if Chris Jericho wasn't one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time? What if he wasn't the lead singer of the band Fozzy? I mean, this band, he's been in this band for a little bit now, and over the last 5, 6, 7 years, they have had a lot of songs on the radio, had a lot of hits. They had the #1 song with Judas, which was just a few years back. And I mean, you think the guy could move from one area to the next, but no, he does it all. He's got a successful podcast. I mean, I don't know how he does it. I don't know how he has the time, but he does. And he does everything at a very high level. But what if? What if he didn't get his big break? What if he wasn't Chris Jericho, professional wrestler? Chris Jericho, host of the podcast Talk is Jericho. Chris Jericho, lead singer of the band Fozzy. I mean, what if? What if he was just Chris Irvine? We'll find out, as Chris Jericho is my guest this week on Celebrity Jobber.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
So, are you an empty nester now?
Yep.
So, how's your life changed? Has it changed? Is your life different now that you got a lot of spare time now?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's not really like a lot of extra free time. It's just a different type of free time now when life changes.
It does. So tell me, you've done so many things over the years, right? You probably, I don't even know what you would consider calling yourself. I mean, you have a successful podcast. You've done some acting, one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time. You're in the band Fozzy. What do you do? What do you tell people that don't really know you, that you walk and introduce yourself to them for the first time? What do you tell them you do?
I mean, I think at this point, just entertainer kind of encapsulates everything. I don't ever go up to somebody and say, "Hi, I'm an entertainer," but I think that's the kind of way that I look at it, with all the different facets of what I do. It all boils down to keeping people happy and keeping them excited about things that might take them away from what they're going through in their lives. So it really is entertainment based, all the different elements of genres that I work on. It's at the end of the day, it's once again just entertainment overall.
So what did you think you were going to do? Like you went to college and you graduated with a communications degree. What did you think was going to happen right after that? What was your thoughts?
Well, it wasn't thinking. The only reason I went to college is because I was too young to go to wrestling school. So you had to be 18, and I graduated from high school when I was 17. So I just went to college to kill some time, basically. I mean, I always knew I wanted to be a wrestler. I always knew I wanted to be in a rock and roll band from early teens. So that was kind of always what it was that I was going to be doing. So yeah, there was no backup plan, and there was no options or alternatives. It was focusing on those things. Wrestling was first, music was second, and going to college, like I said, was basically just to take up some time until I was old enough to go train.
So how did you get into wrestling? Was it something that like you and your dad watched together? Where did it all start?
I used to watch wrestling with my grandma. When I was really young, she was really into it, and I just really got connected with the characters and then the whole show business side of it, and obviously the athleticism, but it was always the stories and the personas and the characters that I got into more than anything.
And your dad was a professional hockey player. He was a big star in the NHL back in the day. Was that ever a part of your life, playing hockey?
Yeah, I played, but I just wasn't really very good at it. It wasn't something I was super passionate about. I mean, I had fun doing it when I was a kid, but it wasn't something that I ever had any aspirations of going into.
So, all these years, all these different phases of your life. I mean, it's going to be this is really a hard question, but, I'm just wondering, do you remember a moment in time where it all changed for you? Like a big break, if you will? Maybe it was a TV appearance or a specific match. What was it, do you feel like, the moment that things like changed for you?
I mean, it's all relative. You work your way up the ladder, and each kind of goal, you think, okay, if I can only, get to this part, and then you do. And if I can only go to that part, and then you do. So, to this day, I mean, you're always just striving to do better and do bigger things. And when you start out on a lower level, even just having a match is a big deal. Or, just if I can only just have one match, or if I can, have a match outside of the province, or, outside of the country, or whatever it may be. And the same with rock and roll. If I can just get a gig, or if I can now just, play a gig, in a different state, and then suddenly, you're just building and building and building. So I think I don't think there's ever really, for me at least, there wasn't like one moment where it was like, oh, this is it. It was just, maybe I should do this. Okay, now I'm doing it. Maybe I should do it a little bit more in a different direction, or maybe try and expand what I'm doing here. And, like I said, it's always different levels of success and different goals that you set for yourself. And when you achieve them, then you don't stop. You just go to the next goal. So that's basically kind of the template, I think, for anybody that's successful, is you never really stop finding those moments. You just create new ones as you go.
And you said earlier that you knew when you were a kid, you always wanted to be a wrestler, and you always wanted to be, in a rock band. Those things, simultaneously, when you were growing up, those were the two things that you always wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of like, those were just the two things that really interested me. And, I thought, well, why just settle for one? Why not try and do them both? And of course, at the time, everybody had opinions. They still do, of, well, you'll never do this, or you'll never do that. And I never really worried about that. Like, why does anybody care what I want to do? Just kind of worry about your own, goals and thoughts and dreams. And that's kind of what I always kind of focused on, just focusing on myself rather than what other people think about me or what other people's opinions are of me, because it really doesn't make any difference. It doesn't have any bearing either way. So once I kind of focused on that and, realized that, like, I was kind of in control of my own destiny, and either it's going to work or it's not, but I'm the one who's going to decide if I do it or not anybody else. So that's kind of where it started for me at a very young age, and I still have that attitude to this day.
Celebrity Jobber. The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito.
Were there any other bands before Fozzy?
Yeah, I was. My high school band was called, well, first I was in a band called Primitive Means. Then my high school band was called Scimitar. And then I was in a couple other bands, like Blackstone Menace was one, Great Caesar's Ghost was another. So yeah, I always had names of bands and played, and that was all throughout my, even when I first started wrestling, I still continued to play music and write songs and record songs.
And then how did Fozzy come into the picture? I mean, did you meet the Duke of Rock somewhere? I mean, I remember the band was quite different, in the late 90s or the early 2000s. It was more of a cover band, and then you guys really, started doing your own thing, and then became very, very successful within the last 5-6 years.
Well, yeah, I mean, like any band, you start playing covers. It's just that our albums were kind of recorded as covers at the beginning, but we decided to do all original stuff fairly early on in our career. Probably about 2004, I think, is when we were like, okay, let's really start focusing on our original material. And then in about 2010, Rich and I decided, like, why don't we just go for it? Like, let's just put all of our efforts into this and start going, basically full time. And that took the band to a different level. But then what really made a big difference was in 2017 when Judas came out and we started getting heavy airplay on rock radio. And, we never realized how important rock radio is and still is until we started getting played on rock radio. And then you realize that just takes things to a completely different level. And here we are with 7 top 10, rock radio songs now at this point. And, once again, like you said, it takes things to a completely different level. So every band has stages that they go through of varied, levels of success and various levels of notoriety. And we're pretty lucky that here we are 25 years into the band's existence, and we're bigger than we've ever been. And that's because of the acceptance of radio, and the fans that listen to it. I never really envisioned us to become a quote unquote radio band, but that's what we are. There's 7 top 10 songs. That's nothing to sneeze about. A gold record that I'm looking at right now for Judas on my wall. So suddenly things go to a different level when you get those accolades.
And where did you meet the guys from Fozzy? How did that whole thing start for you?
I mean, you just meet, we can go through the whole history of the band, but it's been 25 years. We just met up at a venue and just started talking, Rich and myself, and I was thinking about putting together a band, and he was thinking about doing something a little different. And that's basically what started, and it's just one of those things. You meet different guys and different people, and certain ones you hit it off with, and Rich and I were just kindred spirits from the start as far as what we wanted to do with music and musically, and as far as being, a team. And you realize, any longevity that you're going to get, you have to give and take with the guys in your band, especially with the two kind of alphas, the Mick and Keith, or the Steven and Joe type of a thing. And that's Rich and I. So I let him do what he does best. He lets me do what I do best. And we've created a pretty good partnership that creates great music and a great live show and just a lot of excitement whenever we come to town.
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. Celebrity Jobber.
And I want to plug some of these live shows, by the way. October 5th, Fozzy at the Orpheum in Tampa. Also in New York, Gramercy Theater, October 17th. In Philly at the Foundry, October 18th. One of my favorite venues, the Machine Shop in Flint, October 20th. That's a real rock club. That's just an awesome place to play. Is it? Do you have a favorite when you guys are out on the road? Is there a favorite place that you guys like to play, whether you're feeling it from the audience or you're just feeling that the sound of a place is particularly good? Is there a spot that is a favorite to you guys?
I mean, it just goes more, the countries, I think, are kind of more than just certain. I mean, obviously you mentioned all those venues and they're all great cities. They're all great rock and roll cities. Whenever we go to the UK, we do really well over there. It's always a blast to play overseas, playing Australia or going to Canada is always fun. But, the States is a great rock and roll country, and you can go to certain cities and know they're going to be awesome cities like Chicago or Detroit, or you mentioned Flint or New York or Philly. And then you show up like in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, or the Boise, Idaho, or whatever, right, and just tear the house down as well. So it all really depends on the night, but our fans are always really rowdy and excited, and they know what to expect. It's a rock and roll party when Fozzy comes to town. So almost all of our gigs are fun, just in different ways and in varying ways, and obviously some are bigger and some are smaller. But the bottom line is that people have a good time when they come to our shows, and we have a good time on stage, and that's the most important thing.
Where did you come up with the idea of Chris Jericho's Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea? I mean, I think you've done a cruise before, correct me if I'm wrong, but tell me how this one's different, and how did you come up with this concept?
Well, I mean, the only cruise we ever did was the Kiss cruise, and that's when I kind of had the idea of, like, I think I can do this, my version of it, which would be incorporating wrestling and music and comedy and paranormal and all the stuff that I'm kind of really into, and kind of just focusing on making, once again, a big party at sea. And so it took about 3 years to get it rolling. We had to figure out a way to make sure the ring was secured on the deck of the ship. And, can you actually wrestle in the middle of the ocean? Because I never envisioned it being in port. I wanted it to be on the boat, at sea. And I was thinking, well, if a band can play on the ship, why couldn't a ring be up there and guys wrestle on it? So it took a while to convince some people and get the right, technological, involvement and technological answers to some of the questions on how you can do it. And once we got it figured out, it was ready to roll, and it's been great. It's been, we're getting ready to do our sixth one, the 6 on the beach in January, at the end of January, 2025. And it really has just become just this reputation of being a great time. And, if you don't like music, there's wrestling. If you don't like wrestling, there's music. If you don't like either, there's comedy. So it really is something for everybody. And that's what you want to build, is basically a community. It's like a summer camp where people come every year and see their friends and know that they're going to have an awesome time. It's kind of building it like the Super Bowl, where it doesn't even matter who's on board. People want to be a part of it.
ChrisJerichoCruise.com for more information on Chris Jericho's Rock and Wrestling Rager at Sea.
Celebrity Jobber, the Celebrity Jobber podcast with Jeff Zito.
All these jobs, we just talked about all these things that you've done over the course of your entire career. What was your first job? What was your very first job?
Mowing lawns was probably the first one. Then I worked as a stock boy in a department store called Zellers, which is a Canadian kind of a Target, Kmart type thing. I worked at a deli. So those are kind of the initial early forays. I mean, Paperboy was probably my very first job.
Right. And
before mowing lawns.
Anything while you were trying to, make your bones in the ring? Anything that you did while you were wrestling in the early beginning days?
Not really. I mean, I had a bouncing job at a club in Calgary, but I was working pretty much full time, probably about a year and a half into my career. So I didn't really have time for another job. So yeah, I haven't had like an actual, real quote unquote job since I was probably 21 years old, working in a bar. And then it was all wrestling and music and all these other things that we've talked about.
Well, thanks so much. I don't want to keep you, and time is valuable. I appreciate your time, and I like what you taught me today. Small talk is for amateurs. I'm all in. I'm all in on that now, man. Thanks.
All right, dude. I appreciate it, man, and take care.
Chris Jericho, very intense guy, isn't he? His first job, he says Paperboy, then mowing lawns, but real job, worked at a department store in Canada. He also worked at a deli. And while he was wrestling, really didn't have time for a job, but I could imagine he wasn't making the money then when he first started out in wrestling that he's making these days, obviously. So he did mention that he had a bouncing gig back when he first started out. I could definitely see him doing that. He's a pretty intense guy, if you can tell by just talking to him. He's a pretty intense dude, which I believe you've got to be if you're in the world of professional wrestling. I thought what was cool was his grandmother got him into wrestling. He used to watch wrestling with his grandmother when he was a young guy. His father was a big-time star in the NHL. Irvine played 15 seasons in the NHL for the Boston Bruins, the New York Rangers, the St. Louis Blues, and the Los Angeles Kings. And I asked Jericho, if he ever had any aspirations, since his old man was a professional hockey player, if he ever had any aspirations of playing hockey. He said, he liked it, he played, he just wasn't really into it. His focus was professional wrestling. He said at a very early age, he knew he wanted to be a professional wrestler and in a rock band. I thought that was pretty interesting. Not to mention all the things he does today. Outside of wrestling, he's an actor. Yes, he's a frontman of the band Fozzy. He's putting together that cruise. He had that show on the Travel Channel about the paranormal. He's got a very successful podcast called Talk is Jericho. I mean, he described himself as an entertainer. He doesn't just walk up to people and say, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Chris Jericho, the entertainer." But I mean, with all these different things that he does, it's kind of, not one thing, like, what do you do? He classifies himself as an entertainer. I'd have to say maybe a Renaissance man. Chris Jericho, such a great interview, and what a great guest, man. Don't forget, you can check out all my past guests of a Celebrity Jobber up on celebrityjobber.com. Of course, you can subscribe. Please subscribe. Leave a 5-star rating would be great. Leave a review. And streaming on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And follow on Instagram, celebrityjobber_podcast, and youtube.com/the@celebrityjobber. Got some great guests coming up, like comedian Joe Gatto from the Impractical Jokers. and so much more coming up. I can't thank you enough for listening. And until next week, this has been another episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast. I'll see you then. I'm Jeff Zito.